Hello, loved ones. I'm here with the two big babies, Molly over here, and Chloe's off in a distance over here, sleeping. Just came back from lunch. I got hungry and realized I don't have anything prepared at home, and there's not much to cook. I guess I could have eaten a bowl of cereal, but I went to get a sandwich from Novi's just down the block from Emmanuel, and paid too much for a sandwich, and I sat there and I ate the sandwich kind of like not really excited about it, not liking the sandwich, and all because I'm cheap as the day is long. I think if you know me fairly well, you know that I don't like spending money. I'm cheap, and there's a world of difference between being cheap and being generous. And not that I cannot be generous when the time arises to be generous, but it's not something that comes naturally to me. But one thing that definitely does not come naturally is paying way too much for a sandwich and, and enjoying it. But if Miss Dahlia hears this message, she's gonna say, "Hey, why did you go out? You know that always happens." But I thought it was fitting also because of our devotional for today. You know that there's a lot of people talking about taking from rich people to give to poor people, and this is they almost not almost they want it to be a governmentally imposed thing where you have to give, if you have a lot, to take more from you to give to those who have little. And that sounds good on the outside, but to impose that on somebody is just it's not a good thing to take from one to give to another. But it is completely different is to say that I have been given, now I want to give. And we see this principle that the world wants to impose in here in the United States, and this is actually how things work in other countries. But biblically speaking, that one of the ways of giving is that understanding, and we're going to read about that today, understanding what God has given us, and that would make us open and generous to give to others in their time of need, which is different than yesterday. Because in yesterday's portion, Paul talked about the church in Thessalonica and how the church in Thessalonica, even though they had that struggles and hardships and they didn't have to give, they begged them to give, and they to participate in giving, in helping the church, especially the church in Jerusalem that they were making a collection for. And here we have the church in Corinth, who apparently wasn't poor, but yet were lacking in their commitment to give. So let's read what Paul says to the church in Corinth, chapter 8, starting in verse 10. It's just verse 10 to 15. He says, "Here's my advice. It would be good for you to finish what you started a year ago. Last year, you were the first who wanted to give. You were the first to begin doing it. Now you should finish what you started. Let the eagerness you showed in the beginning be matched now by your giving." And this is how he says to give. Give in proportion to what you have. Meaning, if I have a lot, I give a lot. If I have little, I give a little. As God has given me, so I give to others. Whatever you have, I'm sorry, just whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly. Whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly. And give according to what you have, not what you don't have. Now, it's interesting that Paul would say that to them. He's not asking them to give what they don't have, but yet the church in Thessalonica, they begged Paul to participate even though they were giving out of their need rather than out of their excess. Their excess, I mean. So he goes on to say that from there, he says, "Of course, I do not mean your giving, of course, I do not mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for you. Listen to that carefully. Of course, I do not mean your giving should make life easy for others and hard for you. I only mean that there should be equality. Now, this is what many people call taking from somebody else, from the rich, and giving to the poor. And it is not something that you do because you want to, because he says here, whatever you give is acceptable if you give it eagerly. People will not give eagerly that way. It's under compulsion. And he talked about that, or because you have to, in the verses before that. But here he says, that it should be equal. And people think, well, that's equal. If they have a lot and I have a little, we should take from them and give to me, or not to me, to others who have even less. That way we all have the same thing. But that's not what Paul is saying here. And I love this. He says, I only mean that there should be some equality. Right now, you have plenty and can give those who are in need. Later, they will have plenty and can share with you when you need it. In this way, things will be equal. As the scriptures say, those who gathered a lot had nothing left over, and those who gathered only a little had enough. That comes from the book of Exodus, chapter 16. It's talking about the people of God being in the desert and how God provided for them. So if they had, God said, you are to go out in the morning and pick up something that would literally be on the ground that they can take and use to make something that looked like a wafer or a piece of flat bread. But he says, you're only to take and fill this much so that it's enough for you for one day. And the people went out. Now, those who filled this had enough for one day. Even those who had a little bit less than that, God miraculously made it so that it would be enough for that day. And those people who actually took and said, well, I might not have enough for tomorrow. So they took even more. They took 2 cups and they disobeyed God. Those people the next day found out that what they extra they had spoiled. So God was teaching them a principle, not that everyone should be equal, but that we should learn to trust him. If he is a faithful provider, and God provided for his people for 40 years in the desert, not just manna or this what they call bread from heaven, but he also provided for them water. He provided for them meat when they got tired of eating this. And it wasn't that God said, I don't want you to have good things. He was teaching them something, teaching them to be content and also to understand and know that God is their provider. And so there is no way, shape, or form that Paul is teaching that we should all have the same thing, but he's teaching that principle that to give proportionately, meaning if you have been given a lot, then make sure you share that with others. That's the very purpose that God prospers some people so that they would be able to give to other people. The interesting thing is that for the most part, and history has shown it, especially within our church, Miss Dahlia is the one that uh, helps keep track of offerings and who gives what and all that. And only I believe she may be the only one who knows names and numbers. None of the elders, none of the pastors, and definitely nobody else knows who gives what. We know what is given because we have to figure out budget and adjust it and use the money that we have, make plans, but also realistically use what we have and to prioritize that money. But Miss Dahlia is the only one who knows, and she, without telling names, she tells us very clearly that it is usually those who she knows has little that give more when you consider how much they have. And the ones that you would think have a lot, they are sometimes very, very generous, but it's still giving out of a lot that they have. So it's fascinating. And the ones in the middle, they tend to be, or we tend to be, hoarders. We're like, well, we don't know if we're gonna have later, and I think I talked about this in one of the devotionals because he's been talking about giving for some time in the last couple of chapters, and Paul wants us to understand clearly today that, and not Paul, but the Spirit of God through Paul and what he's writing, and he's writing to that church, and how that translates over to us, is that as we think and we consider what we have and how generous God is to us and how faithful God is to us, let us consider those things as we look at others and recognize need. Because sometimes we're so blind that we only see our own need or our own want or our own desire, and we can't even see the need of another person. Um, so think about that today. Ask yourself, like I wrote yesterday, ask yourself, is there something that I have that God has given me in abundance that I am able to share with others? And it doesn't have to be money. It could be time, it could be talent, and it can also be treasure. It could be something you already own. And you're saying, you know what, I've had this for some time, I've enjoyed this for some time. Let me pass it on. You don't know the blessing it is for someone else, and maybe the timing, and it sometimes brings people to tears when you bring a bag of clothes and say, you know what, I no longer use these clothes, but they are still very good. I was wondering if you and your family could use them, or if somebody you know can use them. Sometimes it's incredibly humbling, and some of us don't want to receive from other people, even though we do need. But it is a good, and if it is a good and honest gesture, you don't know the world of difference you can make to somebody with something as humble as giving them something you already have. Not just going out, but some of us can do above and beyond that and actually get someone a gift card and give it to them, not because they need it, but because you want to do something special, something nice, and not do something, but say, here, take this and do something special, something nice, something that you cannot ordinarily do, because life is not all about just paying groceries and rent. God wants us to enjoy life, and sometimes it takes somebody else to help us out. I know that's happened for me in the past, and it's a wonderful thing and incredibly humbling. And you're like, I no, 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 no. But if God is moving somebody to help you or moving you to help somebody else, follow through with that, because you don't know the joy it will bring you and the joy it will bring other people and the joy it brings God to see that we are living out the truth that He has preserved for us in His Word. So think about those things today. If you have any questions, comments, or complaints, feel free to post them below. And even if you don't have a question, comment, or complaint, and you find yourself listening to this and you get to the end, just give it a thumbs up or something. Write something so that I know you're here. Because otherwise, I sometimes I literally feel like I'm talking to myself. So that said, have a great day and God bless you real good. I'm looking at the button now, so I think I should be able to press it rather quickly. All right, bye bye.